Every afternoon, just after the final bell rang at East Ridge High, the yellow school buses lined up along the curb like tired beasts waiting to carry their loads home. The air buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the occasional shout, kids shedding. The weight of the school day like jackets they couldn't wait to take off, but not everyone moved with that same lightness. Near the back of Bus 14, always in the same window seat, sat a girl who moved through the day like a shadow. She wasn't invisible. People saw her, but they rarely looked long enough to really notice. She kept her head down, shoulders slightly hunched as if trying to fold herself into something smaller, quieter. Her backpack was worn at the edges, and tucked inside, always within reach, was a thick sketchbook with a frayed spine and pages that curled from constant use. She didn't talk much. Not because she didn't have things to say, but because words never seemed to do what her pencil could. In class, while others passed notes or whispered jokes, she'd fill the margins of her worksheets with tiny, precise drawings, a teacher's hand holding chalk, the curve of a classmate's ear, the way sunlight hit the fire extinguisher in the hallway. Her drawings weren't flashy, but they were alive. They held the kind of detail that only comes from really looking, from paying attention when no one else does. At home, her room was covered in them, taped to the walls, stacked on the desk, even tucked into the pages of old novels. Her mother, who worked double shifts at the hospital, would sometimes pause in the doorway and just watch her daughter draw, her face softening with a mix of pride and worry. "You got a gift," she'd say, brushing a hand over her daughter's braids. "But don't let the world make you small because you're quiet." School hadn't been easy, not because of the work. She was sharp, observant, good with numbers and patterns, but because being quiet in a loud world often gets mistaken for being weak. And in high school, weakness is like a dinner bell for certain kinds of people. One of them was a boy who'd built his whole identity on noise. He wasn't the biggest kid in school, but he carried himself like he owned every hallway. He laughed, too loud, pushed too hard, and always had a crew trailing behind him like a shadow. He'd started small, snickering when she walked by, mimicking the way she tucked her hair behind her ear during tests. Then came the comments. "Ghost girl," he'd call her, or mute. Once, he'd knocked her sketchbook out of her hands in the cafeteria, pages scattering like startled birds. He'd laughed as she knelt to gather them, cheeks burning, while others looked away or joined in. Teachers saw it happen sometimes, but they'd just sigh and say, "Boys will be boys," or "She needs to stand up for herself." No one asked why she didn't. No one considered that maybe standing up didn't always mean shouting back. That Friday started like any other. Gray skies, damp air, the kind of day that made everything feel heavier. She'd stayed late after school to finish a drawing for art class, a portrait of her little cousin, all wide eyes and missing front teeth. By the time she stepped onto the bus, most seats were empty. She took her usual spot in the back, pressed against the window, and opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. Outside, rain began to patter against the glass. The bus rumbled to life and pulled away from the school. One by one, kids got off at their stops, laughing, shouting goodbyes, disappearing into driveways and apartment complexes. With each stop, the bus grew quieter, emptier. She barely noticed. She was sketching the bus driver's profile from memory. The strong jaw, the cap tilted just so, the way his fingers tapped the steering wheel to a song only he could hear. Then, without warning, the aisle darkened. She looked up. He was standing there, blocking the narrow path between the seats. His arms were crossed, but his eyes darted around like he was checking for witnesses. The bus driver hadn't turned around. The doors had closed. They were alone. "Still drawing your little pictures?" he said, voice low but sharp, like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. She didn't answer. Not out of defiance, but because she'd learned that words only gave him more to use against her. She closed her sketchbook gently and held it against her chest. He stepped closer. "You think you're better than everyone because you don't talk? Like you're too good for us?" She kept her eyes on his shoulder, not his face. It was easier that way. Less personal. He reached out and grabbed the sketchbook before she could react. "Let's see what you've got in here," he sneered, flipping through the pages. His fingers were rough, smudging a half-finished sketch of a street lamp. He paused, on a page with a detailed study of a classmate's hands, long fingers, chipped nail polish, a silver ring on the thumb. You draw everyone but never talk to 'em. Weird. She finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I draw what I see. That seemed to throw him. He blinked, then scowled, like her calm was an insult. Yeah? Well, maybe I'll be in your next drawing. You gonna make me look like a monster? She didn't flinch. I don't draw monsters, she said simply. Just people. For a second, just a second, his mask slipped. His jaw tightened, and something flickered in his eyes. Not anger exactly, something closer to confusion, or maybe shame. But it vanished fast, replaced by the familiar sneer. The bus turned a corner, tires hissing on wet pavement. Outside, the neighborhood blurred past. Houses with porch lights flickering on, kids riding bikes in the rain, a dog barking behind a fence. Normal life moving on, unaware of what was happening inside this metal box rolling down the street. He shoved the sketchbook back at her, harder than necessary. Pages bent. Whatever, he muttered, turning toward the front. But he didn't sit down. He stood near the driver, arms crossed again, staring out the windshield like nothing had happened. She smoothed the crumpled pages with careful fingers. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just sat there breathing, watching the rain streak down the window. What he didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that someone else had been on the bus. A younger kid, maybe 12, who'd fallen asleep on the ride home and missed his stop. He'd woken up just as the confrontation began, frozen in his seat near the front, too scared to move. And in his pocket, his phone had been recording the whole thing. But that was a story for another day. For now, the bus rolled on, carrying its quiet passenger through the gathering dusk, her sketchbook safe in her lap. Her silence not a weakness, but a kind of strength no one had bothered to understand. The bus kept moving, its engine humming like a tired sigh as it turned onto Maple Street. Rain tapped softly against the roof, a steady rhythm that almost drowned out the tension thickening in the air. Up front, the boy who'd just shoved the sketchbook back stood rigid, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the road ahead like he was trying to convince himself, and anyone watching, that nothing had happened. But his fingers tapped nervously against his own forearm, betraying the calm he was pretending to have. In the back, the girl sat perfectly still. She didn't look up, didn't flinch, just smoothed the bent corner of her sketchbook with slow, deliberate strokes as if mending something more than paper. Her breathing was even, but inside her mind raced. Not with fear exactly, but with questions. Why him? Why now? What was he really after? She'd seen kids like him before, not just in school but in life. People who acted loud because they were scared of being small, who pushed others down to feel taller. She didn't excuse it, but she understood it in a quiet, sad kind of way. That understanding didn't make it hurt less, but it kept her from hating him. And maybe that was the thing that unnerved him most. He glanced over his shoulder once, just a quick flick of his eyes, saw her sitting there, calm, composed, like she hadn't just been cornered, like she hadn't been shaken at all. That bothered him more than if she'd yelled or cried, because her silence wasn't empty. It was full of something he couldn't name. He turned back around, jaw tight. The bus passed under a streetlight, its yellow glow washing over the windows for a second before fading again. Outside, the world kept going. Cars splashed through puddles, a couple walked under a shared umbrella. A cat darted across a lawn. Normal life, safe life. Nothing like the quiet storm happening inside this bus. Then without thinking, he spoke again. You always act like you're better than everyone, he said, voice lower this time, almost like he was talking to himself. Like you're watching us, but never really in it. She didn't answer right away. She closed her sketchbook fully, held it in both hands, and finally looked up, not at him, but at the space between them. I'm not watching you, she said quietly. I'm just seeing. There was a difference. Watching felt like judgment. Seeing was just noticing, like how a tree bends in the wind or how steam curls off a coffee cup. It wasn't about good or bad. It was about truth. He didn't know what to do with that. He'd expected anger, tears, maybe even a shove back. But not this. This calm, steady presence that refused to give him the reaction he was used to getting. It left him unbalanced, like stepping on a stair that wasn't there. Whatever, he muttered again, but it lacked its usual bite. He shifted his weight, glanced at the bus driver, who was humming along to a song on the radio, completely unaware, and then turned fully to face her, just a little. "Why don't you ever say anything?" he asked, and this time it didn't sound like an accusation. It sounded like a real question. She thought about it. Not for show, not to stall. She really thought. Then she said, "Because most of the time words don't help. People hear what they want to hear, not what you mean." He frowned. "So you just stay quiet?" "Not always," she said. "Sometimes I draw instead." He looked at the sketchbook again, this time with something other than mockery in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or confusion. "You drew me before?" She hesitated, then nodded once. "Let me see it." She didn't hand it over right away. But after a pause, long enough to make it clear it was her choice, she flipped to a page near the middle and turned the book toward the aisle. He took a step closer, cautious, like approaching a wild animal. There it was. Not a cartoon. Not a joke. Just him, leaning against his locker between classes, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a crumpled soda can. His expression wasn't angry or smug. It was tired, distracted, human. He stared at it for a long time. "You made me look sad," he finally said, voice rough. "I drew what I saw," she repeated. He didn't say anything for a while, just stood there looking at the drawing like it held answers to questions he hadn't even asked yet. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. The bus passed the park where kids used to play after school, now empty except for a lone jogger in a bright yellow jacket. Then, something unexpected happened. He sat down. Not next to her, there was still too much space between them for that, but in the seat across the aisle, a few rows up. He didn't look at her, just stared out the window, arms loose now, shoulders less tense. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was just quiet, like the kind of quiet you get after a storm passes. From his seat near the front, the younger kid, still hidden, still recording, held his breath. He hadn't moved since the whole thing started. His heart pounded, not from fear now, but from the strange feeling that he was witnessing something real. Something rare. Not a fight, not a victory. Just two people stuck in the same moment, finally seeing each other. The bus driver called out the next stop. A quiet neighborhood with brick houses and trimmed hedges. The boy in the front didn't get up. He stayed seated, eyes still on the window. "You missed your stop," the girl said gently. He shrugged. Not really in a rush, she didn't push. Just nodded and went back to her sketchbook, opening to a fresh page. This time she didn't draw the bus driver or the streetlights. She started sketching the back of his head, the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck, the slight slouch in his posture, the way one hand rested on the seat like it didn't know where else to go. He didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't say anything. When the bus finally pulled up to her stop, a small apartment complex with a flickering porch light, she stood slowly, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. As she passed his row, she paused for just a second. "You don't have to be like this," she said, so softly only he could hear. He didn't look at her. But he didn't laugh either. He just gave a tiny nod, almost invisible, and muttered, "Yeah, maybe." She stepped off the bus into the cool evening air. Raindrops clung to her jacket like tiny stars. Behind her, the doors closed with a soft hiss and the bus rolled away, its red taillights fading into the gray dusk. Inside, the boy stayed seated. The younger kid in the front finally exhaled, fingers still wrapped around his phone. He knew deep down that what he'd just seen wasn't something to post for laughs or likes. It was something to hold on to, something that reminded him people aren't just one thing: bully, victim, quiet, loud. They're all messy, changing, trying to figure it out like everyone else. And as the bus turned the corner, heading toward the next stop, the boy in the middle seat finally whispered, so quiet no one could hear, "I didn't mean to." But the words hung in the air like smoke. There, then gone. What happened next wouldn't be dramatic. There'd be no grand apology, no instant friendship. But something had shifted. Not because someone won, but because, for once, no one lost. And in a world that often feels like it's shouting all the time, that kind of quiet change is the kind that lasts. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray light that makes everything feel heavier than it should. The school halls buzzed with the usual mix of laughter, locker slams, and the low hum of gossip. But something was different. Whispers traveled faster than usual. Eyes darted toward certain corners, and phones kept disappearing into pockets the moment a teacher walked by. It started over the weekend. A short video, grainy, shaky, recorded from a low angle, had begun circulating in group chats and private messages. It wasn't posted on any public page. No flashy captions, no dramatic music, just raw footage. A school bus, 2 students, and a conversation that didn't go the way anyone expected. The kind of thing that spreads not because it's loud, but because it feels real. The younger kid who'd recorded it hadn't meant for it to go viral. He'd shown it to his older sister after dinner on Saturday, still shaken from what he'd seen. It's not like the other stuff, he'd told her, voice hushed. No one got hit. No one screamed, but it felt important. She'd watched it twice, then nodded slowly. Yeah, she said. People need to see this. She didn't post it herself, but she sent it to a few friends who sent it to a few more. By Sunday night, half the school had seen it. Now, on Monday, the girl walked into school like any other day. Same backpack, same quiet steps, same sketchbook tucked under her arm. She didn't know about the video yet. She hadn't checked her phone all weekend. She'd been helping her little cousin build a cardboard fort and rewatching old nature documentaries with her mom. So when people started glancing at her in the hallway, she assumed it was just more of the usual attention she tried to ignore. But then a girl she barely knew stopped her near the water fountain. Hey, she said, voice soft, almost shy. I saw what happened on the bus. You okay? The girl blinked. What do you mean? The other girl pulled out her phone, hesitated, then showed her the video. She watched it in silence. Saw herself sitting in the back seat. Saw him blocking the aisle. Heard her own voice, calm, steady, saying things she barely remembered saying. It felt strange, like watching someone else live her life. But there it was. Real. Undeniable. She handed the phone back without a word and kept walking. Her stomach felt tight, but not from fear. More like the kind of ache you get when something private suddenly becomes public. She hadn't wanted an audience. She just wanted to get home. Meanwhile, across the building, the boy who'd been on the bus hadn't come to school yet. He'd woken up late, staring at the ceiling for a long time before even getting out of bed. His mom had knocked on his door twice, asking if he was sick. He wasn't. He just didn't know how to face the day. When he finally did show up, 20 minutes after first bell, he walked in with his hood up, eyes down, shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear. But it was too late for that. People were already talking. Some kids smirked as he passed. Others looked at him with something closer to pity. A few even gave him a nod. Not mocking, but respectful, like they'd seen something in him they hadn't noticed before. He didn't understand it at first. Then someone whispered, Dude, your whole bus moment's all over the place. He froze. What? A classmate pulled up the video on his phone. The boy watched it, jaw clenched, face burning. He expected to see himself looking like a jerk, which he did, but he also saw something else. The way his voice cracked when he asked why she never talked. The way he sat down instead of walking away. The way, for once, he didn't try to be the loudest person in the room. It wasn't heroic, but it was honest. By third period, the principal called both of them to the office, not together, but one after the other. The girl went first. She sat in the stiff-backed chair across from the vice principal, who looked tired but not angry. We've seen the video, he said gently. We want to make sure you're safe. That kind of behavior isn't acceptable. She shook her head. He didn't hurt me. That's not the point, he replied. Intimidation is still a violation even if no one gets hit. She understood. But she also knew the truth was more complicated.
He's not just a bully, she said quietly. He's
going through something. The vice principal sighed. Maybe, but that doesn't excuse what happened. I know, she said. But punishing him won't fix it. He looked at her for a long moment like he was trying to figure out if she was being naive or wise. Maybe both. We'll handle it, he said finally. But thank you for your honesty. When the boy came in later, the tone was different. Firmer. There were consequences. Detention, a mandatory meeting with the counselor, a call home. But the vice principal also did something unexpected. He didn't just scold. He asked questions. What's going on at home? Are you okay? Do you want to talk to someone who will actually listen? The boy didn't answer much at first. Just shrugged, stared at his shoes. But by the end of the meeting, he'd mumbled something about his dad being gone. and school feeling like it didn't matter anymore. The vice principal didn't offer empty promises, just said, "Let's get you some help," not as punishment, as support. Back in the halls, the video kept spreading, but not in the way most viral moments do. There were no memes, no cruel edits. Instead, kids were talking about it in hushed tones during lunch in study hall on the walk home. "Did you see how she stayed calm? He actually listened." I didn't know he was dealing with all that. Even teachers noticed the shift. Less shouting in the cafeteria, fewer shoves in the hallway. Something about that quiet moment on the bus had reminded everyone that people aren't just labels: bully, quiet kid, troublemaker, perfect student. They're all carrying things no one can see. That afternoon, the girl sat on the bus again, same seat, same sketchbook open. She half expected him not to show up, but he did. He didn't sit near her, didn't look at her. But when he passed her row, he slowed for just a second, long enough for her to notice, and then kept walking to the front. She didn't draw him that day. She drew the rain again, the way it slid down the window in crooked lines, never quite straight, always finding its own path, and somewhere near the front. The younger kid who'd recorded it all watched them both, heart full of something he couldn't name: hope, maybe, or just the quiet belief that people can change. If given the chance, no one said anything out loud. But something had already been said, and this time everyone was listening. The days after the video spread didn't bring fireworks or dramatic speeches. There were no assemblies called, no news vans parked out front. But something quieter, and maybe more powerful, began to take root in the school. It wasn't about punishment or praise. It was about seeing people differently. For the girl, life didn't suddenly become easy. She still walked the halls with her head slightly down, still preferred the company of her sketchbook to most conversations. But now, when she passed classmates, in the hallway they didn't look through her like she was air. Some nodded. Others said a soft, "Hey." A few even asked if they could sit with her at lunch. She didn't always say yes, but she didn't always say no either. At home, her mom noticed the change before she did. "You seem lighter," she said one evening, stirring a pot of stew on the stove. "Like you're not carrying so much alone." The girl didn't know how to explain it. She hadn't done anything grand. She'd just been herself, quiet, observant, honest, and somehow, that had been enough to shift something in the world around her. Meanwhile, the boy was navigating a different kind of shift. Detention wasn't new to him, but this time it felt different. He wasn't sitting there because he'd been caught doing something dumb. He was there because someone had seen him do something human. And that was harder to face. His counselor, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes and a habit of leaving space between questions, didn't start with rules or consequences. She started with, "What's it like at home these days?" He didn't answer right away. For weeks, he'd told everyone he was fine, that his dad being gone was no big deal, that school was boring, teachers didn't care, and nothing mattered anyway. But sitting in that small office with the rain tapping against the window, the words finally cracked open. "He's in county," he muttered, staring at his hands. "Got locked up last month. Mom's working double shifts just to keep the lights on. I'm supposed to watch my little brother after school, but I keep messing up." His voice broke on the last word. Not with tears, just exhaustion. The kind that builds up when you've been pretending to be strong for too long. The counselor didn't offer empty comfort. She didn't say, "It'll get better," or "You'll get through this." Instead, she asked, "What do you need right now?" He thought about it. "Someone to notice I'm trying," he said quietly, "even when I fail." That conversation led to more. A referral to a peer support group, a check-in with his teachers, not to scold but to ask how they could help him stay on track. Even a quiet word with the bus driver, who started paying closer attention to who stayed on after the last stop. Back at school, the video kept rippling outward, not as gossip, but as a quiet reminder. In art class, a teacher used it as a starting point for a discussion about empathy. "Sometimes," she told the class, "the bravest thing isn't fighting back. It's staying calm when someone expects you to break." In the cafeteria, a group of kids who used to laugh at Ghost Girl now sat farther from the tables where teasing happened. Not because they were told to, but because they'd seen what silence could hold, and it made them rethink their own noise. The younger kid who'd recorded it all still hadn't told anyone it was him. He watched from the edges, heart full of something he couldn't quite name. He'd expected the video to cause drama. Instead, it sparked reflection. People weren't sharing it to mock or shame. They were sharing it because it made them feel something real. One afternoon, the girl stayed late again, this time not for art, but because the counselor had asked if she'd be willing to talk, not as a victim, not as a hero, just as someone who'd handled a hard moment with grace. They sat in the same office where the boy had broken down days before. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor. "We're not asking you to forgive him," the counselor said gently, "but we want to know. What do you think would actually help?" The girl thought for a long time. She could have asked for him to be suspended, for an apology, for distance. But none of that felt right. "He's hurting too," she said finally. "Maybe someone should really talk to him, not just about what he did wrong, but about what he's going through." The counselor nodded slowly. "That's rare," she said, "to see someone's pain behind their actions." "It's not rare," the girl replied. "People just forget to look." That week, the school quietly rolled out a new peer mediation program. Small, voluntary, focused on listening more than lecturing. The boy was one of the first students invited to join, not as a punishment, but as a step toward healing. He hesitated at first, didn't want to be the reformed bully poster child. But then he remembered the way she'd looked at him on the bus. Not with fear, but with something like understanding, and he said yes. He didn't magically become a different person overnight. He still snapped sometimes, still slouched in class. But now, when he felt the old anger rising, he had a place to go. A quiet room, a listening ear, a chance to say, "I'm not okay," without it being used against him. And the girl. She kept drawing. But now her sketches included more faces, kids laughing in the quad, a teacher grading papers with tired eyes, even the bus driver with his cap tilted just so. She wasn't just capturing what she saw, she was honoring it. One day, she found a folded piece of notebook paper on her desk. No name, just a single sentence. "You saw me when no one else did." She didn't know who it was from, but she tucked it into her sketchbook anyway, right between a drawing of rain on glass and a study of hands learning to hold on instead of push away. No one gave a speech about kindness. No one made a poster. But in the quiet spaces between bells and bus rides and lunch trays, something real had begun to grow. Not because of a video, but because two people chose, in a moment that could have gone wrong, to be human instead of hard. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. Weeks passed and the buzz around the bus video faded like footprints in light rain. Still there if you looked closely, but no longer the center of attention. Life at school settled into a new kind of rhythm, one that felt less sharp around the edges. The shouting in the hallways didn't vanish, but it lost some of its bite. The silence in the back row didn't feel like hiding anymore. It felt like choice. The girl still sat by the window on the bus, sketchbook open, pencil moving in soft, steady strokes. But now sometimes she'd glance up and catch someone watching. Not to mock, but out of curiosity. A few kids even asked shyly if she'd ever draw them. She'd nod, smile just a little, and add their faces to her growing collection of everyday moments. A girl tying her shoe with fierce concentration. A boy laughing so hard milk came out his nose in the cafeteria. The janitor humming as he swept the science wing after school. She didn't draw heroes. She drew people. And that quietly began to change how people saw themselves. As for the boy, he didn't become a saint. He still rolled his eyes in class sometimes, still forgot his homework, still had days when the weight of everything at home made him short with his little brother or snap at a teacher. But something had shifted inside him, like a door that had been stuck for years finally creaking open. He started showing up to the peer support group, not because he had to, but because it was the one place he didn't have to pretend. There he met kids dealing with things no one talked about. Parents splitting up, anxiety that felt like drowning. the ache of feeling invisible even in a crowded room. He didn't say much at first, just listened. But listening, he realized, was its own kind of strength. One afternoon, he walked into the art room during free period. Not to cause trouble, not to joke around. He just stood near the back, watching as students mixed paints and argued over shading techniques. The art teacher didn't say anything, just nodded and handed him a blank sheet of paper and a charcoal pencil. He sat down, stared at the page, didn't know what to draw. So he started with his hands, rough, restless, always moving. He drew them clenched, then open. Then he tried drawing his little brother's face from memory. Round cheeks, missing tooth, eyes wide with trust. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. When the girl walked in later, she'd signed up for an extra art credit. She saw him at the table. Didn't flinch. Didn't avoid him. Just gave a small nod and took her usual seat 2 rows over. He didn't speak to her. But sometimes, when she left her desk to rinse her brush, she'd find a folded note tucked under her pencil case. Not apologies. Not excuses. Just little things. How do you get eyes to look like they're thinking? That drawing of Ms. Ruiz, how'd you get her eyebrow like that? You see the way the light hits the lockers after 3rd period? It's gold, she never wrote back. But she started leaving sketches on the edge of his table. Studies of hands, angles of light, the curve of a coffee cup. Silent lessons. Quiet exchanges. No grand gestures. Just 2 people learning to speak in a language that didn't need noise. The younger kid who'd recorded it all, he finally told his counselor what he'd done. Not for credit, just because he needed to say it out loud. I thought I was just catching him being bad, he admitted, twisting his hands in his lap. But I think I caught something else. The counselor smiled. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can witness isn't a fight. It's a moment of choice. That moment kept echoing, in the way a group of boys stopped shoving a new kid in the locker room after one of them said, "Remember the bus?" In the way a teacher paused before yelling at a student who'd snapped back and instead asked, "You okay?" In the way silence wasn't always seen as weakness anymore, but sometimes as strength held close. Months later, during the school's spring art showcase, a small crowd gathered around a display in the corner. Not the flashy paintings or bold sculptures, but a series of quiet pencil drawings titled, "People I Saw." There were faces of students, staff, even strangers from the bus stop. And in the middle, 2 portraits side by side. One of a boy leaning against a locker, looking tired but not angry. Another of a girl by a rain-streaked window, calm but not closed off. No names were listed, just the date, Friday, October 17th. People stood there longer than they expected to. Some got quiet. A few even teared up, not from sadness but from recognition. From seeing themselves or someone they knew, reflected not as a label but as a person trying their best. The boy stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets. He didn't go up close. Didn't need to. He already knew what was there. The girl stood near the back, watching people's faces as they looked at her work. She didn't feel proud exactly. More like relieved. Like she'd finally shown the world something true. After the showcase ended, as students drifted back to buses and cars, the 2 of them ended up at the same bus stop. Not by plan, just by chance. They didn't talk. Didn't need to. They stood a few feet apart, watching the sky turn pink over the rooftops. When the bus arrived, she got on first, taking her usual seat. He followed but didn't sit near her, just found a spot halfway down, window seat, hands in his lap. As the bus pulled away, she opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. Outside, the world moved on. Kids laughing, dogs barking, streetlights flickering on one by one. Inside, the only sound was the hum of the engine and the soft scratch of pencil on paper. No one became a hero that day. No medals were handed out. No viral fame lasted. But something real had taken root, not in a single moment, but in all the small ones that followed. The choice to listen, the courage to be seen, the quiet understanding that everyone carries a story, even the ones who seem the loudest or the quietest. And sometimes, all it takes is one person refusing to play the role everyone expects, and another person choosing to see them as more than their worst moment, for everything to begin changing. Not with a bang, but with a breath, a glance, a pencil stroke. And in a world that often feels too loud, too fast, too harsh, that kind of change is the kind that lasts.